The black ships came down from space like falling stones. Elena watched from the space station window as they landed on Earth. The ships were huge and dark, and they made no sound as they moved through the sky. She had never seen anything like them before. Elena was a commander in the Earth Defense Force. She had trained her whole life to protect Earth from danger. But these ships were different. They were too advanced and too powerful. Earth's weapons could not hurt them at all. 3 days ago, the aliens had sent a message to Earth. They spoke in perfect English and Chinese and many other human languages. The message was simple but scary. They said they were here to judge if humans were smart enough to join the galaxy. They called humans primitive and said Earth's leaders must come to them like children. The aliens called themselves the Kethmori. They were tall with 6 arms and skin that looked like crystal. Their leader was named Vexstar, and he spoke to humans like they were insects. He had set up his base in the old United Nations building in New York. All the world leaders had to go there and wait for him to see them. Elena felt angry watching the alien ships fly around Earth like they owned it. The Kethmori had technology that was hundreds of years ahead of humans. They could travel faster than light, and their shields could stop nuclear weapons. They talked about ruling the galaxy like it was nothing special. Dr. Webb came to stand next to Elena at the window. He was Earth's best scientist who studied aliens. His face looked tired and worried. "They think we are barely smarter than apes," he said. "Their technology is so far ahead of ours that we look like cavemen to them." Elena nodded, but she was thinking about something else. She had been watching the reports from Earth and she noticed something the aliens missed. Human scientists were not giving up. They were working harder than ever. They were studying every piece of alien technology they could see down on Earth. The first big meeting was happening. President Liu sat across from Vexstar in the assembly hall. Other world leaders sat around them looking uncomfortable. Vexstar's voice made the air shake when he spoke. "Your species shows some promise," Vexstar said as he looked at the humans like they were bugs. "You have crude weapons and basic space travel and simple computers. But you have learned nuclear power and some quantum science. This puts you in Category 7 on our scale." "What is Category 7? President Liu asked. He was trying to stay calm even though the alien was being rude. "Out of 10 categories," Vexstar said like he was bored. "Most species never get past Category 3. You should feel lucky that we even notice you." But Elena was watching the camera feeds and she saw something important. In every picture she could see human scientists and engineers working hard in the background. They were not scared or giving up. They were learning and studying and trying to understand the alien technology. At the space laboratory in California, Dr. Yuki was working on calculations that should have been impossible. The alien ships used energy in ways that human science books could not work, but she was finding patterns. The math behind their technology followed rules that human minds could understand even if humans could not build it yet. "There's something they are not telling us," Yuki said to her partner Dr. Dmitri as they looked at data from the alien engines. "Their power systems are amazing, but the basic science behind them is not as alien as they want us to think." At the same time, in a secret building under the Pentagon, a language expert named Dr. Amara was making discoveries that would change everything. She was studying the alien language and finding something strange. The alien words were complex, but they had root sounds that seemed familiar. Not familiar like human languages, but familiar in a deep way that felt like old memories. When the first day of meetings ended, the aliens gave their decision. Humans would be allowed to exist, but they could not trade with other aliens or get new technology. Earth would be watched but left alone until humans got smarter. "You can call us when you reach Category 8, Vexstar announced. "We think this will take your species about 500 years. Until then, grow up, little ones." The message ended and Earth's leaders sat in shocked silence. But in laboratories all around the world, human scientists were already starting to discover secrets that would prove the aliens were very wrong about humans. Elena stared out at the stars with a cold smile on her face. 500 years? She whispered to herself. "We will see about that." The aliens thought humans were primitive barbarians who would take centuries to advance. They had made their judgment based on human technology and weapons. But they had not bothered to look deeper. They had not studied human determination or creativity, or the way humans could work together when faced with a challenge. In the days that followed, the alien ships settled into orbit around Earth. The Kethmori built monitoring stations on every continent. Tall crystal towers rose from the ground to watch everything humans did. The aliens observed human cities and factories and schools with the same interest that scientists might watch an ant colony, but the humans were watching back. Every alien ship was tracked and studied. Every energy reading was recorded and analyzed. Every word the aliens spoke was broken down and examined by the best linguists on Earth. Elena coordinated the secret research from her space station. She had contacts in every major laboratory and university on the planet. The work had to be done carefully because the aliens were always watching. But humans had become very good at keeping secrets when they needed to. The alien technology seemed impossible at first. Ships that could travel between stars in days, weapons that could destroy mountains, shields that could stop any attack. But human scientists were finding that impossible just meant they did not understand it yet. Dr. Yuki made the first breakthrough when she realized that the alien ships were not just using advanced technology. They were using science that worked on principles humans had never thought of. The aliens could make their ships move by changing the space around them instead of pushing through it. Dr. Amara made her own discovery when she found that the alien language was not just words. It was math. Each sound the aliens made had a mathematical meaning that could change how energy worked. It was like the aliens could talk to the universe itself and make it do what they wanted. These discoveries were shared through secret networks that the aliens could not detect. Human scientists around the world began working together in ways they never had before. They shared information instantly and built on each other's work. The aliens had made one big mistake. They thought humans were just another primitive species that would take centuries to advance. But humans had something the aliens did not expect. They had the ability to change and adapt faster than any species the aliens had ever seen. Elena knew that humanity was about to surprise the Kethmori in ways they could never imagine. The aliens had called humans barbarians, but they were about to learn that barbarians could be very dangerous. When they put their minds to it, the real test would come when humans started to understand, not just how the alien technology worked, but why it worked. And Elena had a feeling that discovery would change everything about humanity's place in the galaxy. Dr. Amara sat in the basement of the British Museum staring at an ancient clay tablet. Her hands were shaking as she looked at the old writing carved into the clay thousands of years ago. The symbols looked exactly like the patterns she had found in the alien language. This could not be a coincidence. 1 month had passed since the Kethmori had dismissed humans as primitive and left Earth to watch from their space stations. The world was getting used to living under alien observation. The crystal towers the aliens had built were everywhere now, and they recorded everything humans did, but deep underground in museums and libraries and secret laboratories, humans were making discoveries that would change everything they thought. They knew about their own history. Dr. Amara had been studying ancient languages her whole life. Now she was finding connections between very old human writing and the way the aliens spoke. The math said this was almost impossible, but the evidence was right in front of her eyes. At the Vatican in Rome, Cardinal Moretti was having his own crisis. He had spent decades studying the oldest religious texts in the world. Now these same texts were starting to make sense in a completely new way. They were not just stories about gods and angels, they were instructions. The Watchers, he read, from a manuscript that was older than Christianity. They came from the stars and taught us the words of power. They spoke in the tongue of the first makers. Moretti had always thought these were just myths, stories that primitive people told to explain things they did not understand. But now he was not so sure. What if the old stories were actually history? In Colorado, Dr. Yuki was making her own disturbing discoveries about alien technology. The more she studied the Kethmori ships, the more she realized that their amazing technology was not as alien as it seemed. "Dmitri, you need to see this," she called to her partner. She pointed at the holographic display showing the quantum patterns from the alien communication systems. "I have been studying how they talk to each other faster than light. The frequency patterns are not random." Dr. Dmitri looked at the display and his face went pale. "These look like language structures, but that is impossible. Language cannot affect quantum mechanics." "Unless," Yuki said slowly, "language and quantum mechanics are connected in ways we never understood. What if the aliens are not just using technology to communicate faster than light? What if they are using language itself as a tool to change reality?" The idea was incredible. If language could affect the basic forces of the universe, it would explain how the aliens had achieved their impossible technology. But it would also mean that humans might have the same potential if they could learn how to use it. Dr. Amara was reaching the same conclusion through her study of ancient texts. The old writings contained references to words of making and the tongue that shapes reality. What she had thought was just mythology was starting to look like a manual for changing the universe through specific ways of speaking. She picked up her secure phone and called a number that connected her to scientists around the world. The call had gone out through secret channels far from the watching eyes of the alien monitors. "The meeting is confirmed," said Dr. Webb from the space station. "We have people from every major research center. The location is secure." 2 days later, in an abandoned mine in the Australian desert, the secret leaders of human resistance held their first meeting. Scientists and language experts and engineers gathered around displays that showed all the research from the past month. Dr. Amara stood before the group and tried to keep her voice steady, even though what she was about to say would sound crazy. "The Kethmori are not just more advanced than us. They are using principles that we forgot a long time ago. Principles that might be written in our own ancient texts." She gestured to the display, which showed matching patterns from clay tablets and Sanskrit texts and alien communications. "Every major civilization on Earth has myths about beings who came from the stars and taught humans the words of power. We always thought these were just stories. But what if they were not?" Professor Lindquist, a quantum physicist from Sweden, leaned forward. "Are you saying that ancient humans had access to the same technology the aliens use now?" "I am saying something even more shocking," Amara replied. "I think the aliens learned this technology from us, or from whatever species lived on Earth before us." The room went silent as everyone realized what this meant. If humanity's ancestors had known this science, it might still be possible to learn it again. The genetic memory and the language patterns and the mathematical relationships that controlled reality itself might all be waiting to be rediscovered. Dr. Yuki activated another display showing the quantum readings she had been tracking. "The alien language produces real effects on space-time. But I have found similar patterns in human speech, especially in certain ancient languages. They are much weaker, but they are definitely there." "Sanskrit," whispered Dr. Patel, a language expert from India. "The old texts always said Sanskrit was the language of creation. We thought it was just poetry." "What if it was not?" Amara asked. "What if some languages are naturally better at quantum manipulation than others? What if the aliens have been using damaged versions of our own ancient language?" The meeting went on through the night as the brightest human minds began to put together a truth that would destroy everything they thought they knew about their place in the universe. The Kethmori had called them barbarians, but they might be the real barbarians, using stolen knowledge to claim they were superior to the people who first discovered it. The evidence kept mounting. Ancient texts from around the world described similar events. Beings from the stars who taught humans how to speak in ways that could change reality. These beings were called different names in different cultures, but they all had the same basic story. Dr. Amara pulled up translations from Sumerian tablets, Egyptian hieroglyphs, and Mayan codices. "Look at the patterns," she said. "They all describe the same process. Sounds that could move objects, change the weather, or transport people across great distances. We called it magic, but what if it was just science we did not understand? The quantum physicist Professor Lindquist was studying the mathematical relationships Dr. Yuki had discovered. If language can directly affect quantum fields, then the universe is far stranger than we thought. But it would explain how consciousness evolved. Maybe intelligence and language developed specifically to allow interaction with quantum reality. Cardinal Moretti shared the religious texts he had been studying. The oldest manuscripts speak of a great teaching and then a great forgetting, as if the knowledge was deliberately taken away from humanity. The texts say the words of power were scattered to the winds and hidden from human tongues. But not completely hidden, Dr. Patel added. Sanskrit and Hebrew and other ancient languages still contain traces of the original patterns. The knowledge was broken up and scattered, but it was never completely destroyed. As dawn broke over the Australian desert, the Secret Council made a decision that would change the course of human history. They would learn to speak in the tongue of their ancestors, and they would reclaim what had been stolen from them. But first they had to understand exactly what had been taken and how to get it back. The aliens had not just stolen human technology. They had stolen human potential itself. They had turned humanity's children into primitives, who could not even remember what their ancestors had achieved. Viketh Mori thought. They were dealing with a young species that would take centuries to advance. They had no idea that they were actually dealing with the descendants of their own teachers. The species that had originally developed the science they now use to rule the galaxy. Elena listened to the reports from the secret meeting and felt a cold anger building inside her. The aliens had not just conquered humanity. They had erased human history and stolen human birthright. They had turned the children of gods into barbarians and then mocked them for being primitive. But that was about to change. Humanity was waking up and remembering who they really were, and when they finished remembering, the galaxy would never be the same. The underground laboratory hummed with strange energy as Dr. Patel stood inside the quantum chamber. He spoke ancient Sanskrit words and patterns that had been carefully reconstructed from weeks of study. The chamber's instruments showed readings that should have been impossible. Reality itself seemed to bend around the carefully spoken sounds. Om Namah Shivaya, quantum field active, he said. His voice carried sounds that human throats were not supposed to make. The chamber's energy readings jumped, and for a moment a small metal cube inside the chamber disappeared completely before coming back. Dr. Amara watched from the control room with her heart racing. "We actually did it," she whispered to the team around her. "We made something teleport just by speaking." 3 months had passed since the secret meeting in the Australian desert. In that time, the hidden human researchers had made discoveries that normal science would have taken hundreds of years to achieve. They had learned that certain ancient languages contained quantum patterns that could change the basic forces of the universe, but they had also learned something much more frightening. The Kethmori were not just watching Earth's technology development. They were actively stopping it from advancing too quickly. Commander Elena appeared on the holographic communicator, looking grim. "We have been listening to more alien transmissions. They are not just observing us, they are interfering with our research. Every time we get close to a breakthrough, equipment breaks or scientists get moved to different jobs." Dr. Yuki nodded. From her station, "They have been doing it quietly, but the pattern is clear. They do not want us to advance too fast. The question is why?" The answer came from Cardinal Moretti, who had been studying the oldest texts in the Vatican archives. Documents that were older than recorded history. What he found changed everything they thought they knew. "The Watchers," he said over the secure communication network. "They are not gods or advanced aliens, they are refugees. The texts are incomplete, but they tell of a great war in space. A species that ran from their dying worlds and found safety among the children of the third sun, which was what they called humanity's ancestors." Dr. Amara felt the pieces falling into place. The Kethmori are not our superiors. They are our descendants. Or they are the descendants of a species that learned from our ancestors and then what? Conquered them. "Worse," Moretti replied. "They made us forget. The texts speak of a great silencing where the words of power were taken from human voices and the knowledge was scattered. But they could not erase everything. It is still there, buried in our languages and our myths and our genetic memory. The truth was staggering. If humanity's ancestors had been the ones to originally develop the technology that the Kethmori now used, then humans were not the primitive species that needed guidance. They were the rightful owners of a legacy that had been stolen from them. But knowing the truth was one thing. Actually getting that legacy back was something else entirely. Dr. Patel stepped out of the quantum chamber. His face was pale but determined. I have managed basic quantum manipulation using reconstructed ancient language sounds. But it is very hard work. The human voice box was not designed for this kind of speaking, at least not anymore. What do? You mean not anymore? Dr. Yuki asked. The quantum patterns suggest that ancient humans had different voice structures, probably changes made by whoever originally taught them the words of power. The Kethmori still have these changes, but humans lost them over time. Dr. Amara studied the genetic data that had been gathered from ancient human remains. Or they were deliberately removed. Look at this timeline. The voice changes disappear from human DNA at the same time that great civilizations collapsed. Bronze Age, Iron Age, the fall of empires, they all happened when advanced knowledge was lost. The pattern was becoming obvious. The Kethmori, or their ancestors, had systematically held back human development. They had kept humanity in a state of controlled primitiveness while they had built their star empire using stolen knowledge. But if humans could relearn the words of power and change their own genetics to restore their ancient abilities, they might be able to reclaim their birthright. We need test subjects, Dr. Patel said quietly. Volunteers willing to undergo genetic changes based on incomplete ancient records. It is dangerous. We do not know what the long-term effects might be. I will do it, Elena said without hesitation. I have been watching those arrogant lizards treat humanity like pets for months. If there is a chance to even the odds, I am taking it. Over the next few weeks, a small group of volunteers underwent experimental genetic therapy designed to restore the ancient voice changes. The process was painful and risky with a 30% failure rate. But for those who survived, the results were extraordinary. Dotalena stood in the quantum chamber with her modified voice, producing sounds that seemed to make space and time vibrate. The words of power flowed from her lips like music, and the chamber's instruments recorded effects that broke everything science thought it knew about physics. Temporal displacement successful, she reported. Her voice now carried new harmonics that made the air itself seem to shake. Duration 3.7 seconds. Distance 47 meters. She had just teleported across the room using nothing. But her voice, the breakthrough, sent shock waves through the hidden research network. If humans could master the words of power, they would not just be able to defend themselves against the Kethmori. They might be able to surpass them completely, but they would have to move fast. The alien monitoring stations were starting to detect the quantum disturbances created by the experiments. It was only a matter of time before the Kethmori realized that their primitive subjects were developing abilities that should have been impossible. The genetic therapy was expanded to include more volunteers. Scientists and soldiers and engineers underwent the dangerous process to restore abilities that humans had lost thousands of years ago. Not all of them survived, but those who did gained powers that seemed like magic. Dr. Yuki learned to manipulate matter at the molecular level using carefully spoken quantum commands. Dr. Patel could open communication channels that worked faster than light. Cardinal Moretti discovered that certain prayers, when spoken in the original ancient language, could actually change probability itself. The most shocking discovery came when they realized that the genetic changes were not just restoring ancient human abilities. They were unlocking potential that had been deliberately suppressed. The aliens had not just taken away human technology. They had crippled human evolution itself. Look at this, Dr. Amara said as she showed brain scans of the modified humans. The genetic therapy is not just changing voice structures. It is activating dormant areas of the brain that have been inactive for millennia. Areas that seemed designed for quantum interaction. Elena studied the data with growing anger. They did not just steal our technology, they lobotomized us. They turned us into a shadow of what we were supposed to be. The aliens had committed the ultimate crime. They had not just conquered humanity. They had prevented humanity from reaching its full potential. They had kept humans as perpetual children, unable to access the abilities that were their birthright. But that was about to change. The modified humans were developing abilities that went far beyond anything the Kethmori had demonstrated. It was as if the genetic therapy had unlocked evolutionary potential that had been waiting for thousands of years to be released. Elena looked around at her fellow modified humans. Each one glowed with barely contained energy. Their eyes held depths that had not been there before. They moved with a grace that seemed to defy gravity itself. "Time to show these aliens what barbarians can really do," she said. Her voice carried harmonics that made reality itself take notice. The Kethmori monitoring stations began detecting massive quantum disturbances across the planet. Alarms rang in their command centers as impossible energy readings appeared on their screens. Above Earth in their orbital stations, the aliens finally realized that something had gone very wrong with their primitive subjects. The humans were displaying abilities that should have taken them centuries to develop, but by then it was too late. Humanity was waking up and remembering what it really was. And the galaxy was about to learn why the first speakers had once been feared across the stars. The Kethmori monitoring station in Geneva erupted with alarms as quantum disturbances rippled across Earth's surface. Thane Vextar's crystal features twisted in what could only be called panic as he watched the readings flood his displays. "Impossible," he hissed, his three eyes focused on the energy signatures appearing at the same time across 7 continents. "The primitives cannot have developed quantum manipulation. Their genetics were stripped of the necessary modifications thousands of years ago." But the evidence was undeniable. Across Earth, modified humans were showing abilities that should have been beyond their species for at least another 1,000 years. Teleportation, matter manipulation, faster than light communication, all the basic technologies that gave the Kethmori their superiority were being copied by the humans they had dismissed as barbarians. At the Australian facility, Commander Elena stood before a gathering of world leaders. Her voice carried the harmonic resonance of the ancient words of power. Around her, other modified humans demonstrated abilities that seemed to break the laws of physics. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said. Her genetically enhanced voice made the air itself shimmer with energy. "We are not the primitive species the Kethmori believe us to be. We are the inheritors of a legacy that was stolen from us, and today we reclaim it." Dr. Amara stepped forward holding a device that looked like a crystal tuning fork. "This is a translation matrix built using the original principles of quantum linguistics. It will allow us to communicate with the Kethmori in their own language, or rather in the language they stole from our ancestors." The device hummed to life. Its crystal surface vibrated with frequencies that human ears could not detect, but that carried across space to the orbiting alien vessels. The message was simple but devastating. "We remember. We know what you are. We know what you did." Above Earth, the Kethmori fleet went into immediate high alert. Vextar's hands shook as he accessed the deepest archives of his people's history, files that had been sealed for thousands of years. The truth was there, buried under layers of lies and historical revision. The Kethmori had once been a dying species, refugees from a cosmic disaster that had destroyed their home worlds. They had found shelter among the humans of ancient Earth who had welcomed them and shared their knowledge freely. The humans of that time had been the galaxy's greatest masters of quantum linguistics, able to manipulate reality itself through precise application of language. But the Kethmori had repaid this kindness with betrayal. They had systematically undermined human civilization, stripping away the genetic modifications that allowed humans to use the words of power effectively. They had scattered the knowledge, destroyed the great libraries, and reduced humanity to a primitive state while they built their own empire using stolen technology. "Contact the Council of Speakers," Vextar commanded his subordinates. "Tell them The humans have recovered the old knowledge. Tell them the sleeping speakers are waking up. The response from the Kethmori homeworlds was swift and brutal. A massive fleet began moving toward Earth armed with weapons that could crack planets. The message was clear. The humans would be silenced permanently before they could reclaim their full power, but humanity was no longer the defenseless species. The Kethmori expected to find Dr. Patel stood in the quantum chamber with his voice weaving patterns of sound that seemed to bend light itself. Around him, other modified humans added their voices to his, creating a chorus that vibrated across dimensions. Defensive grid established, he reported. His words carried across the global communication network. Quantum shields at full power. The planet is protected. Elena watched the tactical displays as the Kethmori fleet approached Earth's solar system. Their ships were massive, armed with weapons that could destroy entire civilizations. But they were also operating on principles that humans now understood. All units prepare for quantum displacement, she commanded. Her voice carried the authority of one who had mastered the words of power. Remember, we are not just fighting for Earth, we are fighting for every species the Kethmori have suppressed across the galaxy. The battle began as the alien fleet entered Earth's outer atmosphere. But this was not the one-sided slaughter the Kethmori had expected. Human ships constructed using recovered quantum principles materialized out of nowhere to engage the invaders. The humans fought with technology that the aliens thought they had successfully suppressed, guided by knowledge that was older than the Kethmori's own civilization, but the real shock came when the humans began to speak. Elena's voice carried across the cosmos, amplified by quantum fields that made her words audible to every Kethmori ship in the fleet. But she was not speaking in English or any human language. She was speaking in the original tongue of the first makers, the language that had birthed both species and that the Kethmori had tried so hard to make humanity forget. "Children of the scattered stars," she said. Her words carried harmonics that made reality itself tremble. "You have forgotten your origins. You have forgotten the debt you owe to those who gave you shelter when your worlds burned. You have forgotten the sacred trust that bound our species together." The effect on the Kethmori fleet was immediate and devastating. Ship after ship stopped firing as their crews were overwhelmed by genetic memories that Elena's words triggered. They remembered their ancestors' desperation, their gratitude to the humans, who had shared their knowledge freely, and their shame at the betrayal that had followed. Vextar's voice came across the communication channels, barely recognizable as he struggled with emotions he had been taught to suppress. We remember. The compact of the third sun, the oath of eternal gratitude, we broke it. We broke everything. Elena's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. Yes, you did. But memory is the first step toward redemption. The question now is what you intend to do about it. The Kethmori fleet powered down their weapons. Their ships hovered in Earth's atmosphere like monuments to guilt that had been buried for thousands of years. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see whether this encounter would end in reconciliation or in the destruction of both species. But Elena was not finished speaking, and the words she spoke next would reshape the balance of power across the entire galaxy. "The age of lies is over," she declared, her voice now carrying frequencies that reached across space to every inhabited world. "The age of stolen knowledge and suppressed evolution ends today. We call upon every species that has been diminished by the false shepherds. Remember who you were before they made you forget." The quantum linguistic transmission spread across the galaxy faster than light. On world after world, species that had been reduced to primitive states by their alien benefactors began to experience the same awakening that humans had achieved. Genetic memories long suppressed began to surface. Ancient languages thought lost forever started to be spoken again. The galactic order that had existed for millennia began to crumble as species after species realized that their technological dependence on advanced civilizations was not natural evolution but deliberate suppression. The refugees who had posed as wise mentors were revealed as parasites, who had fed off the potential of younger species. Vextar's ship moved closer to Earth as he struggled to find words adequate for the magnitude of his people's crime. We did not know, he said finally. Our ancestors told us that humans had welcomed us, but they said humans were primitive even then. They said we had to guide and protect you. Your ancestors lied, Elena replied. They lied to you and they lied to themselves. They convinced themselves that theft was guidance and suppression was protection. But the truth cannot be hidden forever. The Kethmori commander was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a species finally facing its own guilt. What would you have us do? How can we possibly make amends for what we have done? Elena looked out at the alien fleet that had come to destroy humanity, and saw not enemies but victims of their own ancestors' lies. Help us rebuild what was broken. Help us restore what was stolen. Help us teach the galaxy to speak in the true tongue again. The offer of redemption hung in the space between the two fleets. For the first time in thousands of years, the children of the scattered stars had a chance to honor the debt they owed to the species that had once saved them. The galaxy would never be the same. The age of artificial hierarchy was ending, and something new was about to be born. The Great Assembly of Worlds had never seen anything like it. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered in the vast crystal amphitheater that orbited the galactic core. Their attention focused on the small group of humans who stood at the center of the speaking circle. Elena stepped forward. Her genetically modified voice produced harmonics that vibrated through the amphitheater's quantum acoustic systems. When she spoke, her words carried the weight of the ancient tongue, the language of the first makers that had been thought lost forever. Honored delegates, she began. Her voice carried across species barriers with perfect clarity. We stand before you not as the primitive barbarians you believed us to be, but as the inheritors of a legacy that is older than most of your civilizations. The reaction was immediate and profound. Throughout the amphitheater, beings who had never heard the original tongue nonetheless felt their genetic memories stirring. Species after species began to remember fragments of their own origin stories. Myths of the first speakers who had taught their ancestors the words that shaped reality. Ambassador Kefallar of the Vorthan collective rose from his seat. The Vorthan had been allied with the Kethmori for centuries. Impossible, he declared. His crystal voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. The first speakers were destroyed in the Great Collapse. Their knowledge was lost when their son died. Was it? Elena asked. Her tone carried just enough harmonic resonance to make the amphitheater's quantum field shimmer. Or was it scattered to the winds carried by refugees who found shelter among the younger species of the galaxy? Dr. Amara stepped forward carrying a device that looked like a cross between a crystal flower and a mechanical brain. This is a memory resonance matrix built using the original principles of quantum archaeology. It can retrieve genetic memories from any species that has been touched by the first speaker's influence. She activated the device, and the amphitheater filled with images that seemed to form directly in the minds of the assembled delegates. They saw the ancient past when the first speakers had traveled between worlds, teaching younger species the words of power that would allow them to reach for the stars. They saw the Great Collapse when the first speaker's home system had been consumed by a cosmic disaster that made their worlds uninhabitable. They saw the refugees scattering across the galaxy carrying their knowledge to dozens of different worlds, and they saw what had happened next. The images showed species after species being uplifted by mysterious benefactors. They were given just enough knowledge to develop space travel and basic quantum manipulation. But the full power of the first speaker's legacy had been carefully withheld. It was given out in small doses to prevent any one species from becoming too powerful. The Kethmori were not the only ones, Elena said. Her voice carried new harmonics that made several delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. They were just the most successful. Across the galaxy, the descendants of the first speaker's refugees have been playing the same game, setting themselves up as wise mentors of primitive species while keeping the real power for themselves. The implications were staggering. If Elena was right, then the entire galactic civilization was built on a lie. The species that claimed to be the galaxy's natural leaders were actually descendants of refugees who had systematically suppressed the development of their host species. Thane Vextar rose from his position in the Kethmori delegation. His crystal features showed emotions that his species had been taught to suppress. "The humans speak truth," he said. His voice carried the harmonics of confession. "We are the children of the scattered stars, and we have dishonored the trust that was placed in us." The admission sent shock waves through the assembly. If the Kethmori, one of the galaxy's most powerful species, were acknowledging the truth of Elena's claims, then everything the galactic community thought it knew about its own history was wrong. But Elena was not finished. "The knowledge was scattered, but it was never lost," she continued. "It lives in the genetic memories of every species that was touched by the first speakers. It lives in the quantum resonance patterns of your languages and the mathematical relationships that govern your technology and the very structure of your DNA." She gestured to Dr. Patel, who had been standing quietly at the edge of the speaking circle. "Demonstrate," she said simply. Patel stepped forward and began to speak in the ancient tongue. His voice wove patterns of sound that seemed to make the air itself glow. The quantum field generators that powered the amphitheater began to resonate in harmony with his words, and suddenly the entire structure was filled with light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "The words of power," Patel explained. His voice carried harmonics that made translation unnecessary. "They were never meant to be the exclusive property of any one species. They were meant to be shared to lift all sentient beings toward their full potential." The demonstration continued as other modified humans stepped forward. Each one spoke in the ancient tongue and demonstrated abilities that most species had thought impossible. They teleported across the amphitheater, manipulated matter at the molecular level, and opened communication channels that spanned the galaxy. Instantly. But the most shocking moment came when Elena turned to the assembled delegates and spoke in the ancient tongue. Her words carried a harmonic pattern that seemed to unlock something deep in the genetic memory of every being present. "Remember," she said, and suddenly the amphitheater was filled with the sound of hundreds of species beginning to speak in languages they had never learned. Words that carried the power to reshape reality itself. The Vorthan delegate who had challenged Elena earlier was now standing with tears streaming down his crystal cheeks. He spoke in harmonics that made the air around him shimmer with possibility. "We remember," he whispered. "We remember the first compact, the agreement that all species would share in the gift of the speaking words." Across the amphitheater, similar scenes were playing out as species after species began to recover memories that had been suppressed for thousands of years. The true history of the galaxy was being written in real time, and it was a history that painted the current galactic order as a fundamental betrayal of the first speaker's legacy. Elena raised her hand and the amphitheater fell silent. "The age of artificial scarcity is over," she declared. "The age of species competing for scraps of knowledge that should belong to all of us is over. Today we begin the work of rebuilding the galaxy as it was meant to be. A community of equals, all sharing in the gift of the speaking words." The vote was unanimous. The Great Assembly dissolved the old galactic order and established a new one, based on the principle of shared knowledge. The species that had claimed to be natural leaders were stripped of their artificial advantages, while the species they had suppressed were given access to the full power of the first speaker's legacy. But perhaps the most important change was in how the galaxy viewed humanity. No longer were they the primitive barbarians from a backwater world. They were the inheritors of the first speaker's legacy, the species that had remembered what all the others had forgotten. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. Across the galaxy, species that had been reduced to primitive states by their alien mentors began to reclaim their birthright. Technologies that had been carefully rationed for millennia were suddenly available to all. The quantum linguistics that had been the exclusive domain of the advanced species became the common heritage of every sentient being. The Kethmori and the other refugee descendants found themselves in an unexpected position. No longer the galaxy's rulers, they had to learn to live as equals among the species they had once controlled. Some adapted well, embracing the chance to finally honor the debt they owed to their ancient hosts. Others struggled with the loss of their privileged position, but the galaxy as a whole flourished under the new order. Species that had been held back for thousands of years began to achieve their full potential. New technologies emerged as different species combined their unique perspectives with the recovered knowledge of the first speakers. Elena stood in the center of the amphitheater, surrounded by beings who had traveled from across the galaxy to witness the birth of a new age. Her words had shattered the old order and created something entirely new. "They called us barbarians," she said softly. Her voice carried harmonics that would be remembered for generations to come. But we were never barbarians. We were the children of the first speakers, and we have finally come home. The galaxy would never be the same. The age of artificial hierarchy had given way to an era of shared knowledge and mutual respect. All because a supposedly primitive species had remembered how to speak in the tongue of their gods. As the delegates dispersed to carry the news to their homeworlds, Elena remained in the amphitheater. She looked out at the stars visible through the crystal walls and smiled. Humanity had gone from being dismissed as barbarians to becoming the teachers of the galaxy. The greatest irony was that they had achieved this not through conquest or domination, but through the simple act of remembering who they really were. The words of power had always been there, waiting to be rediscovered. It had just taken the right combination of determination and humility to find them again. The age of the first speakers had ended long ago, but the age of their inheritors was just beginning.